Thank you. Good afternoon and happy Valentine's Day. For those of you who may not have remembered this, I have good news for you. I just came from BJ's. We have a lot of great buys at the jewelry counter. I'm very pleased to be here to introduce Gary Loveman, who is Chairman, CEO, and President of Caesars Entertainment Corporation. Many people draw distinctions between those who lead companies and those who teach others how to manage. Gary has succeeded at the highest levels in both academics and business. Gary was a very successful and popular professor at the Harvard Business School when he took on an assignment at Harrah's Entertainment, the predecessor company to Caesars. His work was so impressive and insightful that Gary was offered the job as COO of the growing company. 5 years later, he became CEO and has grown the company from a regional player to an international operator, more than tripling the number of casinos worldwide. We all have something to learn from Gary's insight. His strategy is to know his customers, target the most valuable among them, and build loyalty to his brand. Gary developed and implemented the gaming industry's most sophisticated and successful loyalty program called Total Rewards. Today, this program boasts more than 40 million customers and remains central to the company's strategy. Gary has earned the distinction of being recognized as the gaming and lodging industry's best CEO by Institutional Investor for the past 4 years. He is the past chairman of the American Gaming Association and a director of Coach, Inc. and the FedEx Corporation. He also sits on the Board of Trustees at the Joslin Diabetes Center and on the Trust Board at Children's Hospital Boston. He holds a PhD in economics from MIT, where he was an Alfred Sloan doctoral dissertation fellow and a BA in economics from Wesleyan University. Despite the global reach of Caesars, Gary has maintained his home in Massachusetts and is an active participant in his local community. Perhaps the only individual who simultaneously served as a Fortune 500 CEO and commissioner of the local CYO Basketball League. Please join me in welcoming Gary Loveman.
Thank you, Laura, for that very generous introduction. Mayor, Madam Attorney General, it's a pleasure to be with you at such a timely moment in the development of our industry here in the Commonwealth. So today, while we're gathering lonely souls on Valentine's Day in this forum, 35 million American adults are playing fantasy sports, many of them online. 70 million Americans will visit a commercial casino, and 55 million of them this year will participate in gambling of one sort or another. 78 million Americans will play social games on sites like Facebook and the various Zynga affiliates. 100 million people will pay to text in their vote for who should win American Idol or some other contest, and 9 million worldwide will play online poker in the next several days. All of this is a reflection of the central offering of our business, which is the opportunity for people to place a modest bit of consideration on the realization of an uncertain outcome. So among our participants today are a number of golfers of varying quality, and all of them place wagers on their games. If you follow them around the course, irrespective of their handicap, either their actual or reported handicap, there's always a wager. And the wager, ladies and gentlemen, is embarrassingly small. In most instances, the wagers are so inconsequential that the players wouldn't pause to bend over and pick up the amount they're wagering should they find it at the tee box. But nonetheless, they carefully monitor one another's score and the progress of the wager throughout the game. So why is that the case? Why is it that if I flip this coin in front of you, you have no passing interest in its result, but if I ask the mayor, for example, to consider that the outcome of this coin might determine the leadership of the city council, all of a sudden, he's interested. That's our business. We allow people to place wagers of their own choosing on the realization of an uncertain result. We are not in the investment business. My economist colleagues always look at me puzzled. Why is it that a customer comes and plays a game where the house has an advantage when they could be spending their money at Bob Reynolds' shop at Putnam? Well, our customers don't see it that way. They're not considering on the one hand a hand of blackjack and on the other hand a mutual fund. They're buying entertainment. And like all of us who buy entertainment, they're prepared to pay for it, and they recognize the mechanisms through which this occurs. Now, here in Massachusetts, you may recall I joined you a number of years ago when we talked about the fact that despite there being gaming all over our area and being offered here in the Commonwealth in a number of forms, we had not yet had legislation that made commercial casinos legal here at home. And while this is a very contentious issue and continues to be locally, across the world it's becoming increasingly mundane. Casinos are up and running in places like Singapore, in Des Moines, Iowa, in London, Montreal, Toronto, Geneva. We have a very successful one in North Kansas City, Missouri, in Cairo, Johannesburg, Uruguay, Paris. Pick your favorite cosmopolitan destination or your vision of a very conservative U.S. jurisdiction, and in every instance, casinos have been around, they've operated for a long time, and they've become entirely non-controversial in the context of people's lives in their communities. Alongside the casinos sit some of the most productive retail real estate in the world, particularly in Las Vegas, some of the highest grossing entertainment venues, including one of ours, and some of the highest performing restaurants alongside all of these. We did an IPO of a limited bit of our stock last week, and it happened to fall at the time the investment world was abuzz with Facebook, as Mr. Zuckerberg built what may be a $100 billion online enterprise. If you followed that IPO, you know that 12% of his revenues come from a business called Zynga, which offers games available to any players of any age, games like Farmville, Texas Hold'em Poker, all of which involve exactly the same dynamic that I've described, where people either play for free or they play for some purchased virtual currency in very small denominations. So with 232 million people in the world playing these games, some 60 million of whom played yesterday, I think we've come to a point where this fundamental business, in its various incarnations, is entirely ordinary and increasingly distributed. Now, despite that, boy, it's controversial. Now, recently in the newspaper, there's been some pretty far-reaching headlines, and I have to share with you a couple of my favorites. I'm quoting now from the Boston Globe. No matter how you dress up casino gambling, underneath it's like that scene in The Matrix, when we all see the humans in pods being milked of their life force by nefarious machines. Well, I don't know how sensitive each of you are, but being compared to that portion of The Matrix is a little alarming. Those who think the long-term health of the state's economy will improve are in for the rudest awakenings when they get the true bill for the social cost and see the shocking consequences of an inevitable crime surge, says the Berkshire Eagle. My friend Scott Harshbarger, the former Attorney General here in Massachusetts, a frequent commentator on casino legislation, wrote that the passage of legislation to legalize slots and casinos in Massachusetts will usher in a culture that will inexorably alter the landscape of our great Commonwealth. While it may bring needed jobs and revenue, it will bring increased corruption and crime, unexpected and unnecessary cost to taxpayers, and damage small businesses at a perilous time. And then finally, and I promise finally, the Globe says, unfortunately, it's too late to bar the door from the wolves of the gambling industry. That's me. It's too late. I'm here. The wolves are here. So how can it be that this business gives rise to such hyperbolic commentary? And why is it in such a sophisticated community where we constantly look to best practice in medicine, in law, in all forms of enterprise, to the experiences of other places in the world, why is it the case that here we are so concerned about something that has become so profoundly ordinary elsewhere? Let's take a couple of examples. The Singaporeans. The two largest and most profitable casinos in the world operate in Singapore. They opened in 2009. They were undertaken by the Singaporean government to stimulate tourism, to lead to capital development, and reverse declining tourism and GDP growth. Since that time, there is now $7 billion of annual gaming activity in the small country state of Singapore. Tourism is up 35%, with 13 million visitors last year. GDP grew 14.5%. The year after, before the casinos, it had fallen by 0.8%. This is the same country that bans the importation of chewing gum. So apparently these two things have been able to coexist rather peacefully in Singapore. Let's take another place considered to be the source of constant moral decline, Iowa. Now, recently, there were caucuses in Iowa. They were very widely reported on by the press, and I don't think at any point, at least in my observation of the coverage, anyone suggested that Iowa was in the midst of some inexorable moral decay, despite the fact that gaming was legalized in Iowa as the first of the Midwestern states to do so in 1989. In a population of 3 million residents, there are 17 casinos, 20,000 gaming positions in the state, one for every 93 adults. Here in Massachusetts, under even the most aggressive assumptions, we'll have one gaming position for about every 500 residents, or about 1/5 of the incidence of gaming positions in the Commonwealth that we see today in Iowa. Iowa has an unusual provision in its state law that requires the counties that are home to the casinos to vote through referendum to reauthorize the license every 8 years. Just a couple of years ago, all 14 counties in which a casino resides voted, and the average result was 80-20 in favor of continuing with casino activity. So it appears that there is a tremendous amount of concern about something when it feels foreign or distant to us, but in cases where it's a little bit more broadly experienced, perhaps people's comfort grows. So one must ask, why is this? What are the issues? What are the concerns that give rise to the kinds of coverage by very thoughtful people that I described a moment ago? Let me take them briefly in turn. One is that the casino business is fundamentally predatory, that it preys on people who are disadvantaged and can't make sound decisions for themselves. Unfortunately, fortunately, I should say, that's not the case. The casino industry has, like most luxury good providers, atypically wealthy and highly educated people who are participants in the business. It is not something one needs to do, it is something one chooses to do. And it tends to be chosen by people who are a bit older than average, who have a little bit more time and a little bit more resources to spend on leisure activity. So if you talk to our customers, they are at least as well educated as the average American. They tend to be a little bit older, they tend to come from a little bit higher income bracket, and they are very judicious in the management of their finances. They are far less likely than the average American to have outstanding credit card balances, to not have a will or estate plan in place, or to evidence precarious behavior of any sort. A second common concern is that the arrival of casinos will immediately give rise to an outbreak of crime. Now, this has to do with the roots of the industry, of course, dating back to Bugsy Siegel and organized crime. A lot of industries, when they're illegal, make a welcome home for organized crime, and that was certainly true of gambling in the 1940s. However, through very strict regulation and the normalization of the business, that hasn't been true for a very long time, yet this image lingers. My hunch, Laura, is that if you were to go to my little community in western suburbs of Boston and ask someone at the grocery store, is there some guy who lives here who's in the mob and runs a casino company? Somebody would think there was. I've let this image persist only insofar as it may affect boys that are dating my daughters. But as a matter of fact, crime goes down where casinos are around. Where casinos are around, there's a tremendous amount of law enforcement. There's a tremendous amount of activity. Community values tend to rise. Real estate values go up. And in fact, you tend to see the incidence of crime much higher in other casual places where people congregate than you find here. Now, as a recovering economist, my personal favorite criticism is the so-called zero-sum criticism, which says that if a casino arises and people choose to spend their money there rather than at the local tavern, or wherever else they may be spending their money, the cruise ship or some other place, that there's no benefit. Now, all of us are in businesses where we hope that consumers will choose us versus whatever their alternatives may be. And we hope that as we grow, we will invest and employ people, and our suppliers will invest and grow people and employ people. And it'll be a virtuous cycle. It's no different in the casino business than it is in any other. If people choose to entertain themselves with a Comcast subscription or a trip to Disneyland or a ride at the amusement park or a round of golf or a trip to a casino, these are all the purchase of perishable entertainment activities, and they're all precisely the same. The industry now employs 820,000 people in the United States. My company, close to 90,000 ourselves. This compares, for example, to 180,000 Americans who work in aircraft manufacture, 20,000 in heavy-duty truck manufacture, 135,000 in coal mining, and so on. About 1% of the United States gross domestic product is represented by the gaming industry in one form or another. So that brings us finally to the one important issue that is relevant to this debate, and that is the problem of addiction. We've seen recently with the tragic deaths of many superstars that we've all followed that addiction is a very troubling issue for a lot of people. And gambling is one form of addiction. We have to take that exceptionally serious. And everybody who wants to worry about addiction is doing the right thing. My employees don't want to come to work and be of the view that they are servicing someone's addiction. They want to work on identifying addictions, helping people find care for addictions, and moving those people's lives forward. About 1% of the adult population in this country and other countries with gambling are addicted at any point in time. 99% aren't. The 1% absolutely deserve our foremost attention, research, therapeutic interventions, all the things we can do to address this very damaging problem. But we have to recognize at the same time that the vast majority of participants are in a very different position. The causes of addiction are the causes of addiction in almost every other instance. Mental health issues, comorbidities of various kinds, not the fact that the game is fun or the lights are bright or the noises are attractive or unattractive. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do instead with the circumstances of the individual. So as I turn to a little bit more about Caesars, I must digress that if the country wants to get in the business of deciding what decisions all of us can make responsibly, we have a big agenda ahead of us. You may recall years ago, if you were a Late Night with David Letterman fan, there was a famous episode of his where he manned the drive-through window at McDonald's. And along came a guy wearing about my suit size, ordering a Big Mac, and David refused to give him one. He said, "No, salad." He insisted, "Big Mac, no, salad." Now, if I go to the McDonald's drive-thru, law says I can order a Big Mac. I ought to get a salad. Do we want to be in the business of mandating that I get a salad? I'm not so sure. You can imagine so many other instances where if the debate is to be framed in terms of how some political entity chooses how each of us should make these decisions in our own best interest, we're going to have a very big agenda. And I don't believe that we would make sense, in any formal sense, to isolate one part of that activity from another. If, for example, and Laura, I say this with all due affection for BJ's and all of its competitors, if I'm buying a $15 alarm clock and the clerk insists that I should buy a $9 extended warranty program to protect my family against the unlikely termination of my alarm clock, my friends at Liberty Mutual will tell you the actuarial underwriting of that is pretty favorable to the seller. Not very favorable to the purchaser. And if you're making your decisions based on cool-headed arithmetic, you probably should pass on that. But if you want to buy it, have a ball. In this country, that's the way we do things. And I think it's worth considering that across a very wide range of consumer activity, that's the way it ought to be. All right, so off the soapbox and moving on. So you heard Laura say that I'm a recovering academic. And I made this transition from teaching to running a casino company. When I left Harvard, I had overseen poorly one half of an assistant's time. And when I left the classroom, I went to Harrah's the next day. I had 14,000 employees. This was widely covered in the Las Vegas press as perhaps the stupidest thing anyone had ever seen. And in Las Vegas, let me assure you that the word professor is a pejorative term. It's widely known that should you fall ill, a professor of medicine from a fine university might be your best friend, or if you have terrible legal entanglements, a professor of law will help you. But no one thinks a professor of business is of any use to much of anyone. So I showed up, and how could that have been the case? How would a person in my unusual circumstances have found themselves there? Well, it comes back to the same issue of the application of science to a murky subject as what I just described to you in our industry. I was asked to come teach a course for what was then called the Promise Companies, where our host worked. And I walked in to teach this group, and there were a group of hoteliers and 4 casino people. And when I went in to teach, the 4 casino guys' name cards were empty. And the next class, they were empty again. And the third time, empty again. Fourth time, empty. So after the 4th time, I went to the saloon, and I found the 4 guys. I said, guys, why aren't you coming to the class? The company's provided this class, and we're trying to do a good job. Maybe there's something useful. And they told me in rather coarse language that they didn't think that was necessary, that the casino was doing fine, thank you, and there was little that someone like me could help them with in Las Vegas. So my little brain registered that maybe somebody who's that aggressively unintellectual might offer me an opportunity. Maybe there was a way to arbitrage concepts from other businesses and apply them in a business that has this beautiful mathematized foundation, but was being run by people who didn't appreciate it or use it much. I had been a student of analytic finance, credit cards like Capital One and First USA, who used very sophisticated methods to price credit to customers in a highly individualized way. Insurance companies like Progressive, who underwrote high-risk insureds when other insurance companies wouldn't touch them. And I asked, could we use these same methods to get very close to gaming customers who can choose to buy from anyone they wish when the service is itself rather undifferentiated? So if you come to Las Vegas, where we used to have one facility, you could come in Harrah's Las Vegas, or you could go in the Bellagio. The Bellagio was brand new. Steve Wynn had just built it. It's absolutely beautiful. We refer to it as the sort of place God would build if he had the money. Father, I apologize for that, but it is a common reference in Las Vegas. But from a business point of view, it's an unusual case that a customer can choose between two products of very different qualities for free. You can walk into either, there's no admission charge, no one's going to turn you away. And yet somehow you have to figure out how to get people to choose the 30-year-old building when the brand new building is just up the street. This is marketing in a challenging way. If you're marketing iPads, that's for sissies. That's easy. If you want to test your marketing, you got to market a product against what may be a better competitor. So that's where we started, and we decided that we needed to surround our customers with insight that they helped us learn about what they preferred in the services we offer. And we offer a lot. We have food and entertainment, transportation, gaming, lodging, credit, all sorts of things in a big bundle. So might it be that the Attorney General prefers certain services but not others, and the mayor likes a different set of things? And if we market to both of them as if they're of common preferences, neither of them will find us very informed. But if we learn from their past decisions and market to them specifically on their revealed interest, we might build their loyalty and their recognition that we're very close to what's interesting to them. To do this, we offer our customers a reward program called Total Rewards. 45 million American adults hold this card. A couple of years ago, a lady in North Carolina passed away, and her family posted an obituary in the local paper that said that she was a grandmother of 7. She sang in the Baptist choir, and she was the holder of a Harrah's Diamond Total Reward card. I would suggest that when your family notes your loyalty status in your obituary, the program has traction. Customers are willing to share this information with us because we're prepared to give them things back that's interesting to them immediately. So unlike other loyalty programs where you work and work and work and then you go to the provider and ask for something and maybe you can get it, maybe you can't, we say to folks, you play with us, you stay with us, you ride with us, we give you things that you want today. You eat today, you lodge today, you go to the show today, you stay an extra night, whatever it may be, and that exchange turns out to be very powerful. And from that data, we make inferences about what it is that people really want based on what they tell us, and then we try to get better and better at offering them things they really want. Now, this is not always so well done in other cases. You may be a participant in a grocery store loyalty program where the grocery scans everything that you buy, and after years and years of the support of your dog, you are routinely offered cat food coupons. You may be a lifelong vegetarian who gets meat ads, and you may be over 70 and get baby food coupons routinely. We want to make sure that that's not the case, that everything that we provide is exactly what we think our folks want, and then use that to build competitive advantage with them over time. This applies to the gaming product itself. Laura's a merchant. She knows the merchandising of her stores very well. We want to do the same thing with our facilities. What kind of player likes what kind of game, on what day of the week, under what circumstances? How can we introduce her to different products, get the right product to her under the right terms, price it in the right way, and be as intelligent as possible, recognizing that our competitor is always either building a brand new place or on the verge of doing so. One of my favorite examples of this model has to do with our own little airline. We run 5,000 chartered airplane flights a year. And we take customers from cities where there are no casinos, like Akron, Ohio, for example, 2 cities that we operate that have casinos, and we offer the trip to customers for free. So we say, Mr. Grauspick of Akron, Ohio, we will take you and your wife from Akron to, let's say, Lake Tahoe for free. And we offer you that because we've observed the Grauspicks' gambling behavior, and we know that it's sufficient to cover the trip, and that once we have them there and take good care of them, that will all work out well for us. No one ever goes from Akron, Ohio to Lake Tahoe. In fact, in the recorded history of the city, I'm not sure anyone ever had, until we offered a chartered airplane that took them there. It generates business that would not otherwise have been the case, and it's only doable because we know exactly what these customers are likely to do when offered these sorts of services. If, on the other hand, we ran a radio promotion and put people on the plane to Tahoe, we'd wind up with a lot of people who enjoyed a free trip, and we would never be able to fly such a trip again. The same sort of science we try to apply as well with our employees. When I was just starting this business, I went to stay at Trump's Atlantic City Hotel. And as I was standing in line, waiting to check in, the line was considerable. There were a number of people asking for donations personally while I was in line. I thought, boy, this is a pretty tough crowd. I think we could probably do better. We could have a better service offering than this, and we could attract guests as a result. And we discovered early on that if we could do a couple of things well, if we could be hospitable in our service, and if we could be speedy in the service of our customers, recognizing their interest in being active, we could drive their loyalty. And because we know who they are, we can see among customers who, in fact, are happier year over year with us, do they see us more often or do they see us less often? And not surprisingly, those who are substantially happier move a considerable portion of their business in our direction. Those who we alienate move their business elsewhere. So we began a program that measures guest service every week for every department of every casino we operate in the world. We collect the information from our guests, we post it immediately in the back of house of all of our facilities so that all of our employees can see how they're doing. If this is week number 10 or week number 7 of the new year, how are we doing against week number 7 last year? And that's true in the steakhouse, valet parking, front desk, gaming, hotel, whatever it may be. If we do better this quarter versus last, everyone in that property gets a bonus. Those bonuses have totaled $180 million over the years. The bonuses come in the form of what we call total service points, which are the equivalent to what our guests receive. But these points are allocated to our employees' accounts. They then go online. There's a merchandise portfolio available to them, and they can use those points for Christmas gifts, trips, philanthropic contributions, whatever they choose to do. This is an enormously motivating tool. People respond to knowing how they're doing, knowing how their colleagues are doing, how they're doing against the other properties in the company, and how they're doing in terms of earning these rewards. As a result of this, we've moved the quality of the guest experience up very substantially from where it had been historically to where we would like it to be prospectively. I emphasize these examples only because they come from the application of rigorous tools, of, if you will, science, from industries many of you operate and are familiar with, to an industry that hadn't seen much of this in the past, yet its underlying structure lends itself to this sort of thing very powerfully. One last example. Let's imagine Mr. Reynolds calls our reservation line today to make a reservation for New Year's Eve this coming year. He'd like to stay for a couple of nights. Now, we know a couple of things. We know that we will always be full on New Year's Eve. We have been forever. Demand is high. We also know that the best gaming customers don't make reservations for New Year's Eve in February. They make reservations in late December. And if we were to sell all of our rooms to Mr. Reynolds in February, there would be no one available to take care of the good gamers who would come in near to the date. So we study this historically. What are the patterns of late arriving demand by gaming worth over years and years and years of evidence? So if I'm prepared to give away or sell to Mr. Reynolds today a room that I know I will need in an increasingly dear way as New Year's arrives, what is the optimal price to charge him today based on everything we've learned over all the years? Now, if Mr. Reynolds is a good gamer, then we'll know that when he calls. His information will populate our screen. We'll look at it and say, this is a customer who, in addition to a room rate, might contribute a certain amount in gaming. If he's not known to us, we'll assume, unless he convinces us otherwise, that he's not a gamer, he's just in town for the celebration, and we'll make the decision accordingly. These very sophisticated, real-time types of optimization tools, not something you would think about or hear about in the gaming debate, allow us to take our 24,000 Las Vegas rooms and make them dramatically more productive by making sure that we have the right people in them at any given point in time. So with this application of science to such a controversial business, where is this all going? Well, the industry, although certainly hit reasonably hard by the recession, is in a surprisingly big growth phase. You've undoubtedly read that the biggest market in the world is Macau, the former Portuguese colony that sits nearby Hong Kong in Guangdong province, which now has $36 billion in gaming activity, which is 6 times Las Vegas, as an example, and equal to the entire U.S. commercial casino business combined, and then some, and continues to grow at 30–40% each time they release their numbers. Singapore has the 2 most successful casinos in the world. They too continue to grow at really rather remarkable numbers. Russia is considering casino gaming legislation. Ohio just liberalized casinos. Maryland liberalized casinos. Massachusetts, soon we believe Kentucky. There's been a big debate in Florida. Places as far reaching as Sri Lanka find themselves in these positions. But of course, the one that interests us most is here in Massachusetts. So the legislature approved a gaming bill just before Thanksgiving after many, many years of consideration. And they did so, I must say, in a very thoughtful fashion. There will be 3 regions. There will be competitions among people like ourselves, that is the Suffolk Downs group of which we are a partner, who will compete for the right to have a license in each of these 3 areas. Now, Mr. Mayor, you'll be pleased to know that we're very fond of Boston as a site for this casino. If there's going to be a casino in the eastern part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we think Boston's a pretty good place. 20 million tourists come to Boston each year. It has a tremendous international audience. It has an outstanding culinary history. It has all the things we offer in other great cities around the world, like London with the Olympic Games forthcoming, in Johannesburg, where we hosted our best customers for the World Cup a year or 2 ago, where we believe we can build a very successful business that all of you will be proud of. Some of you will visit us, some of you won't, but it will come to be a very widely respected and very welcomed part of the Boston community over time. Finally, the one other piece of this business that's growing around the world that has certainly caught all of our attention is the continued remarkable growth of online social games. These games are legal for anyone to play anywhere in the world. There are games where people largely play for fun, but a small percentage of customers pay small amounts of money to buy virtual chips. The chips are only there for their own amusement. They cannot be cashed in for anything of value. And millions upon millions upon millions of people participate in this all around the world. We're the owner of a business that is in this industry. It's doing very, very well as it expands onto multiple platforms in multiple jurisdictions and multiple languages. So, ladies and gentlemen, I started with what seemed like a paradox. This is a surprisingly routine, rather scientific business. It certainly gets caught up in a lot of hysteria. And you heard that from the wolf himself. But we've been able, I think, to bring the industry to a very different place over a period of time. And I think if we were to meet again in a few years, a lot of that hysteria would have subsided. We would find ourselves instead with an industry that is pervasive across channels, across geographies, across game types, and hopefully with one of the best here in the city of Boston. Thank you.
Gary's agreed to take a few questions. His company did undergo an IPO last week, so you can appreciate that he's in a quiet period, so there are some things I'm sure he won't be able to answer, but I'm sure he has got many, many good things to share. So if you just wait for the microphone to come around before you ask your question. See someone over here? Okay.
Gary, I'm Don Chaffaro. Excuse me. My question is it important as to the location between an urban location or a rural location, in your opinion?
Well, the urban locations offer the most commanding opportunities in our view because the businesses have the advantage of offering everything that the urban location can provide. It tends to be a much bigger draw as a result with, for example, in New Orleans where we have Mardi Gras and the Jazz Fest and the Saints and the basketball team and all of the things that make the city and the casino such a synergistic offering. There are casinos in somewhat rural areas or in economic redevelopment areas that have prospered largely because of scarcity. But in a market like New England, where there's a fair bit of supply already, I think the location of the casino in an accessible place where there's lots to offer, especially the international guest. I just want to emphasize that the fastest growing segment of the U.S. commercial casino industry are international visitors, especially Asian visitors. And to the degree such visitors are attracted to your location, there's a segment of business that you can enjoy that you can't if they're not naturally there. And fortunately here in Boston, we have a tremendous international visitation base.
Gary, Attorney General Coakley. Thanks for your comments. I appreciate that. As we start from the ground up here, and as you've tried to convince us that you're really a sheep in sheep's clothing, you are clearly a highly regulated industry, and we will do our part, to be fair about that. But I'd be interested in your comments, given that you are all over the country and all over the world. From your point of view, what are the sort of regulatory characteristics that you think work best, understanding that you are going to be regulated?
Thank you, ma'am. And I'm sure once you've had a chance to read my tax returns and fingerprint my children and all that, we'll get to know each other very well. That's all ahead of us. We'll look forward to that time together shortly. The intellectual ancestry of casino regulation was to keep the bad guys out. So casino regulators in Nevada in the 1940s, including later people like Harry Reid, who was the head of the Gaming Commission years later, their job was to keep the bad guys out. And I think they did a spectacular job at that. The bad guys all went out. Now the challenge is, how do you strike a balance to keep the industry in a fashion that you and your colleagues would be proud of, and at the same time foster innovation and encourage the good guys to get in? And in a competitive, more mature business, you have to have both. You have to discourage anyone who has ill deeds afoot, and at the same time not make it so overwhelmingly difficult that people who have capital or skills to bring to the industry are discouraged. I think among our jurisdictions, Nevada and Mississippi are the two that I think strike that balance best. Nevada, because it sees its own interest as being so connected to the industry that it advances its agenda technologically. It's the first to authorize new technologies in the games, things like mobile platforms for sports betting. It has the first platform for internet gaming, which is another part of the future of the industry. And Mississippi, because they have a history of seeing the combination of business and regulatory posture, I think, in a more balanced way. So I would encourage you to look at those two. And I was just kidding about my kids. You only fingerprint me. They usually get off.
So on the same lines with regulation, one of the things that has always intrigued me is sports betting. And whenever casinos do open up, the sports betting aspect is never, ever a part of it. Other than Las Vegas, within the United States, you can't bet on professional sports, college sports, or the like. Why is those two distinctly different when casinos open up, and why aren't they treated the same as others?
It's a great question. Sports betting is quite prevalent almost everywhere else in the world. If you went to the Hong Kong Jockey Club, you would see the largest book on sports in the world, and it would all be focused on English soccer. If you go to the English matches, you can bet on the game in the stadium where the game is being played during the game. Or you can bet online on your set-top box on B-Sky B in England, and it's perfectly normal. The same is true in most of Europe. Here, the sports leagues have taken a stridently negative view of sports betting. It slipped in Nevada a long time ago, and every time it rises to a debate elsewhere, it's opposed stridently, particularly by the NFL. Governor Christie in New Jersey is very close to signing a bill that will authorize sports betting in New Jersey, despite the opposition of the leagues, and my hunch is you'll see a few other states move in that direction. If the wagerer is obliged to place the bet in the casino, that obviously restricts the scale of the enterprise considerably. If the wagerer, as is true in other countries, can wager either online or in a third-party location, then it becomes a very substantial business.
You paint a very robust picture of economic activity. I wonder if you could tell me what your company's philosophy is regarding corporate philanthropy and civic engagement, which areas of activity have distinguished many Massachusetts-based companies.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. We were recognized as the top cash donor of all Fortune 500 companies for a couple of years recently in a Business Week survey. We consider it very, very important to give back a substantial portion of our proceeds to charitable causes. We have focused that attention on elders, and that is because older customers are essential to our business, and of course we stay away from any activities that have to do with people that are under 21. So This is a big part of the corporation's activities. My colleagues in the local businesses are very active in local philanthropy, Meals on Wheels drives, energy-efficient innovations in the homes of elders, these sorts of things, along with corporate philanthropy targeted in that direction. One last question. Sir.
I'd like to say two things. One is a comment. My son works for you, and you are a fair employer. He gives great respect to the way that you treat your people.
Thank you.
But the question that interests me is how much do you believe of the revenue coming into these 3 casinos will be net new revenue, and how much will be taken away from bordering states?
Well, that depends a lot on how much capital the participants choose to put into these facilities. So if you take the facilities in the center and western portions of the state, the cannibalization there will certainly be meaningful from principally the Connecticut Native American facilities. It's hard to speculate exactly how much it would be. If there were to be a facility in Boston that could cater to an international audience as well as a local audience, that would tend to reduce a bit how much cannibalization you'd see out of Connecticut, but the Connecticut and Rhode Island facilities will certainly feel the effect of new competition around. So based on historic precedents, it might be in the neighborhood of 40% cannibalization and 60% growth if the new facilities have the level of amenity and capitalization that I think we'd like to see.